My name is Owen, and I want to tell you a story that completely destroyed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and marriage. I'm a mechanic working at an auto repair shop in Denver, Colorado. My wife Sylvia worked as a nurse at the local hospital. We had been married for 5 years, and I genuinely believed I knew her better than anyone else in the world. Everything started last summer when our new neighbor Amanda moved into the house across the street. She was recently divorced, had a teenage daughter, and seemed like such a sweet, caring woman. Sylvia quickly befriended her, and they would often sit together on the porch, drinking coffee and chatting for hours. I was genuinely happy that my wife had found a new friend. Living in a new neighborhood can be lonely, and Amanda seemed to bring out a different side of Sylvia, more relaxed, more social. Amanda would frequently come over for dinner, and whenever she had car troubles, I was more than happy to help her out. She was always grateful and would bring homemade cookies or pies as a thank you gesture. Amanda was an attractive woman in her early 30s, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a local company and seemed to have her life together despite the recent divorce. Her daughter Emma was a quiet 16-year-old who spent most of her time with friends or doing homework. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Everything changed 3 months ago when Sylvia suggested we install a baby monitor in our bedroom. She said it was for security purposes, to hear if someone tried to break into the house at night. I thought it was odd since we didn't have children, but I agreed. Home security was important, especially with all the break-ins that had been happening in our neighborhood lately. Sylvia installed the transmitter in our bedroom and placed the receiver in the kitchen. She seemed oddly excited about the whole setup, testing it multiple times to make sure it worked properly. I didn't pay much attention to it, thinking it was just one of her random ideas that would fade away after a few weeks. The monitor had excellent range and crystal clear audio quality. Sometimes I would hear Sylvia moving around upstairs while I was having my morning coffee in the kitchen. It became background noise, something I barely noticed anymore. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Everything changed one Tuesday morning when I left my phone at home and had to return to get it. I had an important client call scheduled and I couldn't afford to miss it. As I entered the house, I heard voices coming through the baby monitor on the kitchen counter. Initially, I thought Sylvia was talking on the phone in the bedroom, but then I recognized the second voice. It was Amanda. Does he suspect anything? I heard Amanda's voice, slightly distorted by the monitor. No, Owen is very trusting. He doesn't even realize you come here when he's not home, Sylvia replied with a laugh that sounded different from her usual laugh, more secretive, more intimate. I froze next to the monitor, my heart starting to race. What were they discussing? Why was Amanda in our bedroom while I was supposed to be at work? How long can we keep hiding this? Amanda asked, her voice carrying a tone of concern. I don't know. But for now, everything is going according to plan. He thinks we're just friends, Sylvia responded, and I could hear rustling sounds like bedsheets moving. My mind started racing with possibilities, none of them good. Were they planning some kind of surprise? But the secretive tone suggested something much more sinister. But the real shock was waiting for me later. I quietly climbed the stairs, my work boots making minimal noise on the carpeted steps. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and what I saw through that crack completely shattered my world. My wife and our neighbor were lying in our bed together, intimately embracing each other. Sylvia had her head resting on Amanda's chest, while Amanda gently stroked my wife's dark hair. They were both partially undressed, and the intimacy of the moment was unmistakable. This wasn't a friendly hug or comfort between girlfriends, this was romantic, sexual intimacy. I stepped back, trying to process what I was seeing. My wife was cheating on me, but not with another man as I might have expected. She was having an affair with another woman, with our neighbor who had been coming to our house for dinner, who I had been helping with car repairs, who had seemed like such a sweet addition to our lives. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined possible. It wasn't just the physical infidelity, it was the elaborate deception, the fake friendship, the lies that had been building for months right under my nose. But the real shock was waiting for me later. I managed to leave the house without them noticing and drove to work in a complete daze. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I had to pull over twice because I felt like I was going to be sick. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my wife, about our life together had just been revealed as an elaborate lie. The next few days were torture. I tried to act normal around Sylvia, but every interaction felt fake and hollow. When she would mention Amanda or invite her over for dinner, I felt physically ill. I started paying closer attention to their interactions, noticing things I had somehow missed before. The way Sylvia's eyes would light up when Amanda arrived. How they would sit just a little too close on the couch. the inside jokes they shared. The way Amanda would sometimes stay late after I had gone to bed, claiming she and Sylvia were having girl talk. I began to understand that this affair had been going on for much longer than I initially thought. Probably since shortly after Amanda moved to the neighborhood. Every friendly gesture, every dinner invitation, every moment of apparent neighborly kindness had been part of an elaborate deception. But the real shock was waiting for me later. A week after my devastating discovery, I decided I needed to confront Sylvia about what I knew. I planned to come home early from work and have an honest conversation about our marriage and her affair. But when I arrived home, I heard another conversation through the baby monitor that completely destroyed any remaining hope I had for our relationship. "I can't keep living this double life anymore," Amanda was saying, her voice filled with emotion. "I understand, but we need more time. Owen has a good salary and the house is in his name. If I leave now, I'll be left with nothing," Sylvia responded, and her tone was cold, calculating. This wasn't the voice of a woman torn between two lovers. This was the voice of someone planning a financial strategy. "So you're just using him for money?" "Of course. Do you think I would stay with him if it weren't for that? He's boring, predictable. With you I feel alive." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Our entire marriage, everything I thought we had built together, was just a financial arrangement for her. I wasn't her husband, I was her meal ticket. I sat in my car in the driveway, listening to them discuss my life like I was some kind of business asset. They talked about how much the house was worth, how much money I had in savings, what I might be entitled to in alimony if she left me. But the real shock was waiting for me later. That evening, I sat in the kitchen trying to figure out how to handle this situation. How do you divorce someone who's been using you for years while cheating on you with the neighbor? How do you protect yourself financially when your spouse has been planning to take everything you've worked for? Suddenly, the baby monitor crackled to life again. "Is Owen asleep already?" Amanda's voice. "Yes, he always goes to bed early. Listen, I have an idea. What if we moved to California? My sister lives there and she could help us get settled. What about Owen? I'll tell him I want a divorce. I'll make up some reason, maybe that we've grown apart or something. What about the house? Under Colorado law, I'm entitled to half of all marital property. I'll force him to sell the house and give me my share." My blood ran cold as I listened to my wife plan the destruction of my financial life. She wasn't just going to leave me, she was going to take half of everything I had worked so hard for. The house that I had purchased before our marriage, the cars, the savings account I had been building for our future, all of it was at risk. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went to see a divorce attorney. I needed to understand my rights and options. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Morrison, explained that while Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, infidelity can still impact property division in certain circumstances. If you can prove adultery combined with financial misconduct or abandonment of marital duties, it could affect how assets are divided, she explained. But you need solid evidence. Evidence. I realized I had been sitting next to the perfect recording device for weeks. That baby monitor had been inadvertently documenting every detail of my wife's betrayal and her plans to financially destroy me. I decided to use their own surveillance system against them. For the next week, I carefully recorded every conversation they had in our bedroom. I bought a high-quality digital recorder and connected it to the baby monitor receiver. Every day after work, Amanda would come over, and every day I would capture more evidence of their affair and their plans. In one particularly damaging recording, Sylvia said, "Owen is such a sucker. He still thinks we're a happy couple. If he only knew that I never really loved him the way he loves me. This marriage was always just convenient for me." Those words were like daggers to my heart, but they were also ammunition for the legal battle I knew was coming. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Amanda's voice on the recording, "What if he finds out about us?" "Sylvia, he won't. Owen isn't smart enough to figure it out. He sees what he wants to see. Besides, even if he suspected something, he'd never actually investigate. He trusts me completely." The arrogance in her voice was stunning. She had such contempt for me, such confidence that she could continue manipulating me indefinitely. Another recording from a few days later. "Amanda, I feel bad about lying to him. He's actually a nice guy." "Sylvia, nice guys finish last, Amanda. I learned that a long time ago. Owen is nice, but nice doesn't pay the bills or give you excitement. He's stable, reliable, boring. Perfect for providing financial security while I figure out what I really want." "Amanda, and what you really want is me?" "Sylvia, what I really want is freedom. Freedom to be with who I want, to live where I want, to do what I want. And that requires money, Owen's money. Each recording revealed more layers of deception and manipulation. My wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was a calculating predator who had been using me from the beginning. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 1 week later, I had collected hours of recorded evidence. Conversations about their sexual relationship, detailed plans to leave me and move to California, discussions about how to maximize the money they could extract from our divorce, and most damning of all, Sylvia's repeated admissions that she had never loved me and was only using me for financial security. I returned to Patricia Morrison with a thick folder of transcripts and audio files. She listened to several of the recordings, taking notes and occasionally raising her eyebrows at particularly damaging statements. "This is incredibly strong evidence," she said finally. "Not only do we have clear proof of adultery, but we also have evidence of your wife's intent to commit financial fraud against you. These recordings show premeditation and planning to deceive the court about her motivations for divorce." What does that mean for me? It means we can argue for a much more favorable division of assets. Given that she entered the marriage under false pretenses and maintained it fraudulently while planning to abandon it for financial gain, we can potentially protect most of your premarital assets and significantly reduce any spousal support obligations. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could protect myself from the financial devastation Sylvia was planning. But the real shock was waiting for me later. I decided it was time to act. I had enough evidence to protect myself legally, but I wanted to confront Sylvia and Amanda in a way they would never forget. I wanted them to understand that their victim wasn't as stupid and helpless as they thought. That Friday, I told Sylvia I was going to visit my brother in Colorado Springs for the weekend. She couldn't hide her excitement at the prospect of having the house to herself for 2 full days. "Have a great time, honey," she said, giving me a kiss that now felt like a betrayal itself. "Drive safely." Instead of leaving town, I checked into a hotel about 10 minutes away from our house. I spent Saturday planning my confrontation, reviewing my evidence, and preparing mentally for the end of my marriage. Saturday evening, I drove back to our house. Amanda's car was parked in our driveway, not even trying to hide their affair anymore. I could see lights on in our bedroom window. I used my key to enter quietly through the front door. The baby monitor in the kitchen was broadcasting their intimate conversation upstairs. They were talking about their plans for Sunday, discussing which restaurants they might visit, what movies they might watch, playing house, in my bed with my wife. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Instead of storming upstairs in anger, I decided to be strategic. I wanted to see how they would react when caught, how they would try to explain or justify their behavior. I climbed the stairs quietly, and when I reached the bedroom door, I simply knocked. "Sylvia? I forgot something." The sudden silence from inside the room was deafening. I could hear frantic whispering and the sound of people quickly getting dressed. After about 30 seconds, Sylvia opened the door, wearing her bathrobe and trying to look casual. "Owen, I thought you were at your brother's place." "I was, but I realized I forgot my medication and I need to take it tonight." I looked past her into the room where Amanda was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully clothed but looking extremely uncomfortable. "Hi, Amanda. I didn't expect to see you here." "Hi, Owen." Sylvia and I were just talking. In the bedroom. With the door closed. At 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. The silence stretched on uncomfortably. I could see both women trying to come up with a plausible explanation, but we all knew there wasn't one. "Owen," Sylvia began, "I think we need to talk." "Yes, we do. But not right now." "Amanda, I think you should go home." Amanda practically ran from the room, gathering her things quickly and mumbling something about calling Sylvia later. Within minutes, I heard the front door close and her car starting up. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Once Amanda was gone, Sylvia tried to take control of the situation. She sat on the bed and patted the space next to her, as if we were going to have a normal marital conversation about a small misunderstanding. "Owen, I know this looks bad, but I can explain everything." I remained standing by the door. "I'm sure you can. You've gotten very good at explaining things over the past few months." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that I know about your affair, Sylvia. I've known for weeks." Her face went through several expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally defiance. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to hear all about your plans to move to California with Amanda after you take half of everything I own." Now she looked genuinely shocked. "You've been spying on us?" "I've been listening to the baby monitor you insisted we install. You know, the one that broadcasts everything you say in this room to the kitchen downstairs." The realization dawned on her face, followed by anger. You had no right to listen to our private conversations. Private conversations? In my house, in my bedroom, between my wife and her lover, planning to destroy my life? I think I had every right. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Sylvia stood up from the bed, her demeanor completely changing from apologetic to aggressive. Fine, Owen. Yes, I'm having an affair. Yes, I want a divorce. And yes, I'm entitled to half of everything we own together. That's how marriage works. That's how marriage works when both people enter it in good faith, Sylvia. Not when one person is using the other person as a piggy bank while planning their exit strategy with their secret lover. You can't prove that. I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings. Owen is such a sucker. He still thinks we're a happy couple. If he only knew that I never really loved him the way he loves me. Her own voice filled the room, cold and calculating. She stopped talking and stared at the phone. I have hours of recordings, Sylvia. Weeks of your conversations with Amanda. Every detail of your affair, every plan to take my money, every cruel thing you've said about me and our marriage. She sat back down on the bed heavily, the fight going out of her. What do you want from me? I want a divorce and I want you out of my house. The house is marital property. I have rights. You had rights when you were acting as my wife. You gave up those rights when you decided to become a fraud and a cheat. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The next few days were a nightmare of legal proceedings and emotional destruction. Sylvia hired her own attorney and tried to fight for her share of our assets, but the recordings I had made devastated her case. When her lawyer heard the evidence, he advised her to accept whatever settlement I was willing to offer rather than go to trial, where the recordings would become public record. Your wife's own words prove that she entered and maintained the marriage fraudulently, Patricia Morrison explained to me. No judge is going to reward that behavior with a large financial settlement. Sylvia tried everything she could think of to salvage the situation. She claimed the recordings were made illegally. They weren't, it was my house and my recording equipment. She claimed I had manipulated or edited them. I hadn't. She even tried to claim that her affair was the result of emotional neglect on my part. The recordings proved the opposite. But the real shock was waiting for me later. During one of our final meetings with the attorneys, Sylvia made a last desperate attempt to save herself. Owen, we can work through this. Lots of couples recover from affairs. I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we have to throw away 5 years of marriage. I looked at her across the conference table, this woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, and felt nothing but pity. Sylvia, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to lie to me every single day for months. You chose to bring your lover into our bed. You chose to plan the destruction of my financial life. Those weren't mistakes, they were deliberate, calculated decisions. People change, Owen. I can change. You're right. People do change. I've changed too. I used to be someone who trusted blindly, who believed that love and commitment were enough to build a life together. Now I'm someone who knows better. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Due to the evidence of Sylvia's fraud and the recordings proving her mercenary motivations, she received almost nothing in the settlement. The house stayed with me along with my savings, my cars and my retirement accounts. Sylvia left Denver with 2 suitcases and her old Honda Civic, essentially the same thing she had brought into our marriage 5 years earlier. But the real shock was waiting for me later. A month after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call from Amanda. Owen? This is Amanda. What do you want? I wanted to apologize for everything that happened. And to tell you something about Sylvia that I think you should know. What could you possibly tell me about her that I don't already know? She used me too, Owen. Just like she used you. I was surprised by this revelation. What do you mean? When everything came out and you filed for divorce, Sylvia suggested that we run away together to California like we had planned. But then she told me something that made me realize what kind of person she really is. What did she tell you? She said that once she got your money from the divorce, she was planning to leave me too. She told me that our relationship was just a way to make her marriage more bearable, but that she didn't see a real future with me either. I was quiet, processing this information. She said she wanted to be free to explore other options with your money as her safety net. I was just as much a pawn in her game as you were, Owen. Maybe even more so because at least you got something real from her for a while. I got nothing but lies from the very beginning. Amanda continued, I realized that Sylvia doesn't actually love anyone but herself. She's incapable of real emotional connection. She just uses people to get what she wants and then discards them when they're no longer useful. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Where is she now? I asked Amanda. I don't know. After the divorce was finalized and she realized she wasn't getting any money from you, she disappeared. She asked me for a loan to help her get settled somewhere new, and when I said no, she called me selfish and ungrateful. Selfish and ungrateful? She said I should be grateful that she had shown me what it was like to be with a woman, and that the least I could do was help her financially since I had ruined her marriage. Even after everything I had been through, I was amazed by Sylvia's ability to twist reality to make herself the victim. I'm sorry, Owen. I'm sorry I was part of destroying your marriage, and I'm sorry I didn't see what she was doing to both of us until it was too late. After that phone call, I understood that I had been saved from much worse than just a cheating wife. I had been saved from a person who was fundamentally incapable of love, loyalty, or genuine human connection. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 3 months after the divorce, I was starting to rebuild my life. I had begun seeing a therapist to work through the emotional trauma of the betrayal, and I was slowly learning to trust my own judgment again. One evening, as I was cleaning out some old boxes in the garage, I found a stack of letters that Sylvia had written to me during our first year of marriage. I had saved them because they seemed so romantic and heartfelt at the time. Reading them now, with everything I knew about her true nature, was a surreal experience. She had written about how much she loved me, how excited she was about our future together, how grateful she was to have found someone who truly understood her. At the time, those letters had made me feel like the luckiest man in the world. Now I could see them for what they really were, carefully crafted manipulations designed to secure my emotional and financial investment in our relationship. One letter in particular stood out. Owen, you make me feel safe in a way I've never experienced before. With you, I can be my true self without fear of judgment or abandonment. I promise to love you and be faithful to you for the rest of my life. The irony was devastating. She had never shown me her true self. The person I had lived with for 5 years was a carefully constructed character designed to extract maximum benefit from our relationship. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Emma, Amanda's daughter, at the grocery store. She was now 17 and seemed much more mature than when I had last seen her. Hi, Mr. Owen, she said somewhat shyly. Hi, Emma. How are you doing? I'm okay. I wanted to say something to you about what happened with my mom and your wife. I was curious to hear her perspective as someone who had witnessed the affair from the outside. You don't have to say anything, Emma. It's not your responsibility. I know, but I want to. I saw what they were doing and I tried to tell my mom it was wrong. She told me I was too young to understand adult relationships. Emma looked around to make sure no one was listening, then continued, but I think I understood better than she did. I could see that Sylvia was using my mom the same way she was using you. My mom was so lonely after the divorce from my dad, and Sylvia took advantage of that. This 17-year-old had seen through Sylvia's manipulations more clearly than any of the adults involved. Your mom called me after the divorce to apologize. She said Sylvia had used her too. Yeah, my mom was really hurt when she realized the truth. She thought she had found someone who really cared about her, but it was all fake. Emma paused, then added, I'm glad you found out when you did, Mr. Owen. People like Sylvia don't change. They just find new victims. But the real shock was waiting for me later. A year after the divorce, I was contacted by a private investigator who was working on behalf of another man who suspected his wife of cheating. The investigator had somehow connected Sylvia to a pattern of similar behavior in other relationships. Mr. Owen, I'm investigating a case that might involve your ex-wife. Could we meet to discuss what you experienced during your marriage? I agreed to meet with him, curious about what he had discovered. The investigator, a former police detective named Robert Chin, explained that Sylvia had been married twice before our relationship, information she had never shared with me. Both previous husbands reported similar patterns of behavior, he explained. Financial manipulation, secret relationships, elaborate deceptions about her feelings and motivations. She told me I was her first serious relationship. That was a lie. She had a very clear pattern. She would target financially stable men, present herself as the perfect partner, maintain the relationship long enough to gain legal rights to their assets, then engineer situations that would allow her to leave with as much money as possible. Robert showed me copies of divorce records from Sylvia's previous marriages. Both had ended with the husbands losing significant amounts of money and property. Both men had been completely blindsided by their wives' betrayals. You were actually the first one to successfully protect your assets, Robert told me. The recordings you made were brilliant. Her previous victims didn't have that kind of evidence. I realized that I hadn't just survived a marriage to an unfaithful woman, I had survived a marriage to what was essentially a professional predator. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Robert continued his investigation and discovered that Sylvia was currently living in Phoenix, Arizona, under a slightly different name. She had found another victim, a divorced engineer named Marcus who owned a successful consulting business. Based on what I've observed, she's using the exact same playbook, Robert explained. New identity, tragic story about her previous relationship, perfect girlfriend behavior to hook him emotionally and financially. What happened to Amanda? From what I can tell, she was genuinely heartbroken by the whole experience. She moved back to Ohio to be closer to her family and is trying to rebuild her life. Unlike your ex-wife, she seems to have learned from the experience and is working to make amends for the damage she caused. This information was both vindicating and deeply disturbing. I had been right to trust my instincts about Sylvia's true nature, but it was chilling to realize how calculated and predatory her behavior had been. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 2 years after my divorce, I had mostly moved on with my life. I was dating again, carefully and with much better boundaries, and had found a sense of peace that I hadn't expected to achieve so quickly. Then I received a letter that completely shocked me. It was from Sylvia. The letter was postmarked from a women's correctional facility in Arizona. She had been arrested for financial fraud in connection with her relationship with Marcus, the engineer Robert had told me about. In the letter, she claimed to be a changed person who had found religion and wanted to make amends for the damage she had caused. She asked for my forgiveness and wondered if I would be willing to speak on her behalf at her sentencing hearing. I know I hurt you deeply, Owen, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I was lost and broken, and I made terrible choices that hurt innocent people. I've been working with a counselor here, and I understand now how much pain I caused you and others. The letter went on for several pages, detailing her supposed spiritual awakening and her plans to dedicate her life to helping other women avoid the mistakes she had made. I showed the letter to Patricia Morrison, who had remained my attorney for some post-divorce matters. "This is classic manipulator behavior," she said immediately. "She's in legal trouble and looking for character witnesses to help reduce her sentence. Don't be fooled by the religious conversion story. People like her use whatever tools they think will work." I never responded to the letter, and I certainly didn't appear at her sentencing hearing. Through Robert Chin, I learned that she received a 4-year prison sentence for multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 3 years after my divorce, I was in a much better place emotionally and financially. I had met someone new, a wonderful woman named Rachel who was genuine, honest, and had her own successful career as a veterinarian. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and trust, everything my marriage to Sylvia had lacked. One evening, while Rachel and I were having dinner, she asked me about my previous marriage. I had told her the basic story, but she was curious about the details. "How did you know for sure that she was lying about everything?" she asked. I thought about the question carefully. I think part of me always knew something wasn't right, but I ignored my instincts because I wanted to believe in our relationship. The baby monitor just gave me undeniable proof of what I had been subconsciously sensing for months. "What do you mean?" "Little things that didn't add up. The way she would sometimes forget details about stories she had told me about her past. How she never seemed genuinely interested in my work or my friends. The way she would change the subject whenever I tried to talk about long-term plans for our future." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like you learned to trust your instincts." "I learned that love shouldn't require you to ignore red flags. Real love is built on honesty, transparency, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Everything I had with Sylvia was built on lies." But the real shock was waiting for me later. 5 years after the divorce, I received a phone call that brought the entire story full circle. It was from Marcus, the engineer in Arizona who had been Sylvia's victim after me. "Owen, I got your number from the private investigator who worked on my case. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "The evidence you collected and the testimony you gave to investigators helped convict Sylvia and probably saved me from losing everything. If you hadn't documented her pattern of behavior so thoroughly, she might have gotten away with destroying my life too." Marcus explained that Sylvia had stolen over $200,000 from him before he discovered her true nature. Unlike in my case, she had actually managed to access his bank accounts and credit cards through elaborate schemes involving forged documents and identity theft. "She's getting out of prison next year," he told me. "I wanted to warn you in case she tries to contact you." "I appreciate that, but I'm not worried. She has no power over me anymore." "How did you get to that point?" "I'm still struggling with the anger and the feeling that I was an idiot for not seeing through her lies." I thought about his question carefully. Time helped, but mostly it was accepting that being deceived by someone that manipulative doesn't make you weak or stupid. It makes you human. People like Sylvia are experts at deception. They've spent their entire lives perfecting their ability to manipulate others. Do you think she'll ever change? No. People like Sylvia don't change because they don't see anything wrong with their behavior. They see other people as resources to be exploited, not as human beings deserving of respect and honesty. Prison might teach her to be more careful, but it won't teach her to be a better person. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 6 years after my divorce, I married Rachel in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Everything about this relationship was different from my marriage to Sylvia. We had built our relationship slowly, based on genuine compatibility and shared values. There were no secrets, no hidden agendas, no questions about each other's motivations. The contrast was stark and healing. With Rachel, I never had to wonder if she was being honest with me or question whether she actually cared about my well-being. Our relationship was straightforward and authentic in a way that my marriage to Sylvia never had been. As I was cleaning out some old files to make room for our combined documents, I came across the transcripts of Sylvia's recorded conversations. Reading them now, years later and in a completely different emotional place, I was struck by how obvious her manipulation had been. Every conversation revealed someone who was completely self-centered, who saw relationships purely in transactional terms, who was incapable of genuine empathy or love. The person in those recordings wasn't someone who had made bad choices, she was someone who was fundamentally broken at a core level. I realized that my marriage to Sylvia had taught me invaluable lessons about recognizing authentic versus manipulative behavior, about trusting my instincts, and about the difference between love and manipulation. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 7 years after the divorce, I received one final contact from Sylvia's world. It was a letter from Amanda who had tracked down my address through public records. Amanda wrote that she had spent years in therapy working through the psychological damage from her relationship with Sylvia. She had learned that she had been a victim of what psychologists call love bombing, followed by manipulation and emotional abuse. I wanted you to know that I finally understand what happened to both of us, she wrote. Sylvia wasn't just unfaithful or selfish, she was predatory. She identified our vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. Amanda explained that she had discovered that Sylvia had researched both of us extensively before moving to our neighborhood. She had chosen her location specifically because she had identified 2 potential targets living across from each other, a financially stable married man and a lonely divorced woman who could serve as both a romantic distraction and a way to destabilize the marriage. She played us against each other without either of us realizing it, Amanda wrote. She made me feel like I was rescuing her from an unhappy marriage, while making you feel like you had a happy marriage that just happened to be going through a rough patch. This revelation was the final piece of the puzzle. Sylvia hadn't stumbled into our lives by accident, she had targeted us deliberately and methodically. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Amanda's letter continued with information that completely recontextualized everything I thought I knew about Sylvia's methods. I hired my own investigator after everything happened, trying to understand how I could have been so completely fooled. What he found was terrifying. Sylvia has been doing this for over 15 years, moving from city to city, state to state, leaving a trail of destroyed relationships and financial ruin. The investigator had uncovered at least 8 different identities that Sylvia had used, along with corresponding relationships that had ended in financial fraud, identity theft, or elaborate insurance scams. In 2 cases, her victims had lost not just their money but their homes, their businesses, and their relationships with their children. One man in Florida lost custody of his kids because she manipulated the divorce proceedings to make him look like an unfit father. Another man in Texas had to declare bankruptcy after she systematically destroyed his credit and stole his business clients. The scope of Sylvia's predatory behavior was staggering. I wasn't just one victim among many, I was part of a decades-long pattern of systematic destruction. Amanda concluded her letter, "I'm sharing this information because I think you deserve to know the full extent of what we survived. You saved yourself and probably saved me too by exposing her when you did. If you hadn't collected that evidence and fought back, she might have continued using both of us for years." But the real shock was waiting for me later. 8 years after my divorce, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who was creating a film about financial predators who use romantic relationships to commit fraud. She had learned about my case through the court records and wanted to interview me about my experience. The filmmaker, Sarah Martinez, explained that Sylvia's case had become something of a legend in law enforcement circles because of the systematic way she had operated and the extensive evidence I had collected. Your recordings were used as a template for training FBI agents who investigate romance fraud, she told me. The way you documented her admissions of premeditation and financial manipulation created a whole new category of evidence that prosecutors can use in similar cases. Through Sarah's research, I learned that Sylvia had been released from prison after serving 3 years of her 4-year sentence. Within 6 months of her release, she had changed her name again and moved to another state where she was already targeting new victims. People like her don't stop, Sarah explained. They view what happened to them as a learning experience, not a reason to change their behavior, but a reason to get better at avoiding consequences. The documentary, when it was released, helped law enforcement agencies across the country identify and prosecute similar predators. My story became part of a larger narrative about how sophisticated financial and emotional manipulation had become in the digital age. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 9 years after the divorce, I received a phone call that brought everything full circle in a way I never expected. Mr. Owen? This is Detective Lisa Rodriguez with the Phoenix Police Department. We're investigating a case that involves your ex-wife Sylvia, and we need your help. It turned out that Sylvia had escalated her criminal behavior. She was now suspected in the disappearance and presumed death of her most recent victim, a wealthy retiree named Frank Morrison who had vanished along with his entire life savings. We found your contact information in our files from her previous fraud conviction. We're hoping you might be able to provide insight into her methods and psychology that could help us locate Mr. Morrison. The detective explained that Frank had been missing for 3 months. His family had discovered that he had withdrawn $800,000 from various accounts and investments shortly before his disappearance. Sylvia had also vanished at the same time, along with a woman she claimed was her sister but who investigators believed was actually another accomplice. Based on our investigation, we believe she may have moved beyond financial fraud into more serious crimes. Mr. Morrison's family is desperate for answers. I agreed to help with their investigation, providing detailed information about Sylvia's manipulation techniques, her ability to assume different identities, and the patterns of behavior I had observed during our marriage. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The investigation into Frank Morrison's disappearance revealed the full extent of Sylvia's evolution as a criminal. She had been working with a network of other con artists, creating elaborate schemes that went far beyond simple romance fraud. Detective Rodriguez shared some of the details with me as the investigation progressed. Sylvia and her accomplices had been targeting elderly, wealthy individuals across multiple states. They would spend months building trust and romantic relationships, then convince their victims to liquidate their assets for supposedly lucrative investment opportunities. In at least 3 cases that we know of, the victims have completely disappeared after transferring their money. We suspect they were murdered, but we haven't been able to prove it yet. The scale of the operation was staggering. The FBI estimated that Sylvia's network had stolen over $15 million from victims across a dozen states over the past 5 years. Your ex-wife appears to be one of the most sophisticated financial predators we've ever encountered, Detective Rodriguez told me. The psychological profiles our experts have developed suggest she's a textbook psychopath with an exceptionally high intelligence and an ability to mimic normal human emotions that's almost supernatural. 6 months later, Frank Morrison's body was found in a remote desert location outside Las Vegas. He had been murdered execution style, and evidence at the scene connected his death to Sylvia's network. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The FBI manhunt for Sylvia lasted another year before they finally caught her trying to cross the border into Mexico with forged documents and over $2 million in cash. Her arrest made national news because of the scope of her crimes and the number of victims she had left in her wake. During her trial, I was called as a witness to testify about her methods and the evidence I had collected during our marriage. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at the woman I had once thought I loved, I felt nothing but a profound sense of relief that I had escaped when I did. Sylvia showed no emotion during the proceedings, no remorse for her victims, no acknowledgement of the lives she had destroyed. She sat calmly taking notes, occasionally whispering to her lawyer, treating the entire process like a business meeting rather than a reckoning for multiple murders and decades of fraud. When I testified about the baby monitor recordings and her admissions of manipulation during our marriage, she looked at me with what I can only describe as mild curiosity, as if I were an interesting specimen she was studying rather than a person whose life she had tried to destroy. The prosecutor told me later that my testimony had been crucial in establishing the pattern of behavior that helped convict her on multiple charges of fraud, identity theft, and ultimately 3 counts of murder. Sylvia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the real shock was waiting for me later. After the trial, as I was leaving the courthouse, Sylvia's defense attorney approached me with a message she had asked him to deliver. "She wanted me to tell you that you were the only one who ever figured her out while there was still time to save yourself," he said, looking uncomfortable with the message he was delivering. "She said to tell you that she actually respected you for outsmarting her." Even in defeat, even facing life in prison, Sylvia was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She wanted me to feel some kind of twisted pride in having won our battle of wits, as if our entire relationship had been nothing more than a game to her. I looked back at the courthouse where she was being led away in shackles, and I realized that this message was her final attempt to maintain some kind of psychological control over me. She wanted me to think of myself as the one person who had been clever enough to beat her at her own game, rather than as someone who had been victimized and manipulated for years. I walked away without responding to the message. I had learned long ago that engaging with Sylvia in any way, even through intermediaries, was giving her exactly what she wanted: attention and the feeling that she still had power over people's emotions and reactions. 10 years after my divorce, I finally had complete closure. The woman who had tried to destroy my life was locked away forever, and I had played a role in ensuring that she could never hurt anyone else again. But most importantly, I had built a new life that was everything my marriage to Sylvia had never been: honest, loving, and real. Rachel and I now had 2 children, a home filled with genuine laughter and affection, and a relationship based on mutual respect and trust. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the years I spent with Sylvia, if I wish I had never met her. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain and the deception, but I don't regret the lessons I learned about human nature, about the importance of trusting your instincts, and about the difference between real love and manipulation. My experience with Sylvia taught me to value authenticity above all else. It taught me to pay attention to actions rather than words, to trust my gut feelings about people, and to never ignore red flags no matter how much I want to believe in someone. Most importantly, it taught me that surviving betrayal doesn't make you weak or foolish. It makes you wiser, stronger, and more capable of recognizing and appreciating genuine love when you find it. The baby monitor that had accidentally exposed Sylvia's deception had been thrown away years ago, but the lessons it had taught me would last forever. Sometimes the truth comes to us in unexpected ways, and sometimes the most devastating revelations turn out to be the most liberating ones. I never saw or heard from Sylvia again after that day in the courthouse. She became a footnote in my life story, a painful chapter that had taught me invaluable lessons about human nature and the resilience of the human spirit. My real life began the day I walked away from her lies and manipulation. Everything that came after, my relationship with Rachel, our children, the peace and contentment I found in genuine love, was made more precious by the contrast with what I had survived. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.